Greetings and welcome again back to the Davenant Academy course, Ties That Bind. Last time we were together, we talked about friendship and why we need friends that are deep, deep friendships that press us on toward the end that we were created for, ultimately to glorify God and to enjoy Him. Part of enjoying God and glorifying Him is also enjoying His creation, His created goodness, the things that He has made for us to enjoy, and enjoying them with one another is crucial. And that's what we're going to turn to today a bit. We're going to talk today about hospitality and table fellowship. Now, there's a few different aspects to this, but the first thing that you say, that comes to mind for me when you say hospitality or table fellowship is food. Of course, we must eat. We are human. We're made to eat. And I think that's a more profound thought than we might often think of. I want to take us first to a book it's Justin Early. It's called The Common Rule. It's a fairly recent book, but he draws upon some of the more ancient practices. He's talking about habits and forming habits of purpose, and a rule of life is something that's drawn primarily from monasteries and like the Benedictine order or rule, and so there's something about our habits of life and the rhythms of life that we create for ourselves that help us both flourish and serve the Lord and praise Him and give Him the glory that He deserves and enjoy His good created order that He made for us. So Early says, our need for food says something profound about us. It says that we need God, we need others, and we need the created world. The need to eat reveals our dependence upon God. Perhaps one of the most significant differences between us as image bearers of God and God Himself is that unlike Him, we are dependent upon things outside ourselves. Food is our daily reminder of that. We are created to hunger because we were made to feast on God's generosity. Even if we attend to our appetite multiple times a day, it stubbornly comes back, almost as if we were strangely made to do so. This is not a hallmark of our fallenness, as if one day in the new heavens and new earth we will get over this pesky need for food. Our hunger to feast on God's creation is actually a good way that we were made. The need to eat reveals our dependence on each other. From planting to harvesting to preparing food, this distinguishes us from almost all other animals. It's impossible to survive without each other's help. Despite the fact that the modern world has obscured the way that food comes to our table, every meal signifies an incomprehensibly vast web of dependence on our neighbors and their dependence on us. And then finally, the need to eat reveals our dependence on creation. We live in a web of mutual sacrifice. Whether you're eating plants or meat, every single bite signifies a moment when something died to give you life. We take that thing in and it becomes our future life. There seems to be something distinctly Christ-like about the fact that our ongoing daily life depends entirely on the sacrifice of other life on our behalf. And the table, he mentions one other thing that I think is crucial here. The table is the center of gravity. When we see food as fuel, we turn all of this on its head. We aren't grateful to God. We assume that we have a right to food. We aren't grateful to each other. We create systems of food that embody the exploitation of our neighbors who grow, transport, and prepare and serve our food. We aren't grateful to creation. We consume the earth's food greedily and carelessly as if the world were ours to binge on and trash instead of ours to steward and to cultivate into flourishing. Disrupting that fallen culture by recentering life around the table is not the responsibility of a few health and farming activists. It is the call of every human made in the image of God. The Christian call to love neighbor should not and must not ignore the daily ways we eat, what our food is, or how it gets to us. Given that our communal life revolves around our need to eat, we may say that the table is the center of gravity for loving neighbor. The daily habit of eating at least one meal with others is important precisely because it asks us to rearrange our priorities around the communal table and to acknowledge that we are made for food and for each other. So I start there and I read that rather lengthy quote from his book because it really frames, I think, this topic for us in some helpful ways. The fact that we need God, that we are dependent upon his provision for everything, our nutrients that nourish our bodies, that care for us, the availability of those things to us, and our dependence on one another in that same way. God uses means, obviously, to bring things to us, so we rely upon one another in community for the provision of all of these goods. We talked about that in the first lecture in the series, where we need one another more than we like to think in our day, even just to eat the things that we eat every day on our table. And that dependence upon God's good creation that he's given us as a gift. And our enjoyment of that is really crucial. And to do that together is the way we were designed. We were made to worship the Lord in community with one another. And as we enjoy a meal together, we give thanks to God. Table blessings are in every Christian culture. There's been table blessings and different traditional forms of it, or just a general prayer and before thanking God for the food and for giving us all that we need, providing for us. So there's this acknowledgement, even in all the Christian cultures that there have been since Christ. And that's where I wanted to start, like I said, because I think that's foundational. And then as we start to turn toward hospitality and table fellowship, we begin to think about more, how does that then help us to love our neighbor? Really started to turn there, and one person that does an excellent job of turning that direction, thinking about hospitality and serving food to others and inviting others into our home and to eat at table with us, is Rosaria Butterfield. Her book, The Gospel Comes with a House Key, is an excellent book on hospitality. Every Christian should consider reading this, I think, because it does a great job of really helping us recognize that hospitality isn't an optional thing for Christians. It's something that we must do. We're made in God's image. We're called to be his disciples and called to bring others into his kingdom. So hospitality toward other believers, we've talked about already a little, but then hospitality toward unbelievers as well, as a means of them being introduced to our God. If we're living a hospitable life, that really opens up opportunity for witness and for glorifying the Lord and drawing others into his kingdom. God uses that in so many instances. Just being willing to love on others and invite them to eat with us really opens them up to hearing more about who our God is and what he has done in our lives to make us into hospitable human beings. But hospitality can be intimidating. Some people think of hospitality as you got to get out all the good china, you got to have this expansive, meal, extravagant meal where you have everything. And there's place for that. We're going to get to that next week when we talk about festivity and the place for festivity and what are the foundations for festivity and holidays. But that doesn't extend to every meal. That doesn't extend to just ordinary everyday hospitality and eating meals together with one another in fellowship over table. And Rosaria Butterfield does a great job of sharing some things about this ordinariness of hospitality and the Christian. She says, radically ordinary hospitality does not simply flow from the day-to-day interests of the household. You must prepare spiritually. The Bible calls spiritual preparation warfare. Radically ordinary hospitality is indeed spiritual warfare. These things don't go together in polite society. Hospitality conjures up the scene of Victorian tea with crocheted doilies and China-inspired blue and white paisley-patterned teacups. Radical means change from the root and conjures up political and social upheaval and the kind of change that normally scares the pants off of conservative Christians. Ordinary means everyday, commonplace, predictable, reliable, and regular. And spiritual warfare is what we engage in when temptation is clobbering us again and Satan is winning, tearing us up, our Christian witness and our families all being torn apart. Only in the Jesus paradox do these incongruous ideas come together, and come together they must. God calls Christians to practice hospitality in order to build loving Christian communities, to build nightly table fellowship with fellow image bearers, to ease the pain of orphanhood, widowhood, and prison, and to be qualified as elders in the church, to be good and faithful stewards of what God has given us in the person, work, example, and obedience and suffering of the Lord Jesus Christ. The gospel call that renders strangers into neighbors, into family of God, is all pretty straight up when you read the Bible, especially in the book of Acts, and it requires both hosts and guests. We must participate both as hosts and as guests. We must giving and receiving are good and sacred and connect people and communities in important ways. But this is not where it ends. God calls us to practice hospitality as a daily way of life, not as an occasional activity when time and finance allow. Radically ordinary hospitality means this: God promises to put the lonely in families, Psalm 68:6, and he intends to use your house as living proof. So what she's saying there, I think, is really crucial to consider, that hospitality and welcoming people into our homes and welcoming people to join us at table together in fellowship. And not just Christians, yes, Christians, but also non-Christians is part of our witness. It's part of our building up of Christ's body and the unity of the fellowship of the saints. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. It's part of really, like she mentions, easing the pain of orphanhood, widowhood, and prison. So those that have suffered those things need the fellowship, need a family to bring them into their family, to love on them, to show them that there's room for all of them at in Christ's family and at the table. And ultimately, that really speaks powerfully to our witness as well. If we're not willing to extend the hand of fellowship and take meal together with people, we'll never really be able to build solid relationships. There's something that happens at the table. I love what we do at the Davenant House, partly because of this. When we have people gathered for a retreat or coming to be there for discipleship, we sit down at a table, we all serve one another. We even though my family is the host family at the house, we all work together to prepare the meals. We try to serve one another. We learn and grow together in that through that service, and we have fellowship while we're serving together to prepare the meal and get it on the table. And then we also there's something at the table where we're sitting down, enjoying good gifts from God. Nothing extravagant most of the time, though we have some really excellent meals, don't get me wrong. There's something that happens, the walls kind of come down, the things that are pretenses kind of fall away. there's no echo chamber like in Facebook and stuff when we're conversing about something that may be somewhat controversial or somewhat challenging to parse out and think through. And we may disagree about something, but when you're face to face eating food together and having that fellowship one-to-one, there's just something that doesn't allow for the same kind of jumping to conclusions, the same kind of quick anger, quick reactions. It really is conducive to be face to face with other image bearers of God in conversation, in debate, in even argument, for the sake of growing together and striving to understand one another. And that face-to-face at table really provides an ideal atmosphere for real growth and real conversation and real discussion and debate over these kinds of things. So that's I think one of the valuable things about table fellowship together. But again, hospitality, something that I think God is ultimately extremely hospitable to us. I mean, when we think about the way he made everything, he designed everything, he created everything in a way that we could inhabit it, that we could enjoy it. The garden was this lovely place that provided all that was needed, that gave comforts, that fed, that even after the fall clothed us as human beings. And in the same way, when we invite someone into our home, we're inviting them not only into the the house to have a meal, that they're being invited to have their needs cared for, to be provided for, to provide that love and interaction and fellowship that all human beings need as well, face to face. So there's so much that's provided for a person in hospitality, and it provides human dignity to those that may not otherwise have it also. I mean, how many have invited a homeless person to come have a meal with them? That humanizes them, it dignifies them, it helps them recognize that they are valuable and made in God's image, and that they are loved, and that there's opportunity for them to receive love and have their value recognized. To turn a little bit different direction and kind of wrap things up, we're gonna turn to festivity and holidays next time around. And there's a difference, an important difference and distinction between our everyday meal, that we obviously need every meal to be able to continue to live, to have our needs provided for, to have healthy bodies and be able to do the work that God's called us to. But there's also a special thing about festivity and holidays that can't actually exist without there being, most of the time, being a common time, a time of just the normal, mundane, everyday things of life. One thing that's necessary through all of this, though, that we can recognize, I think, from being at table with one another, is the goodness in God's good creation. And we can give him glory for that, whether it's a mundane, everyday, common meal, or as a meal that is meant for feasting and for celebration and is lavish and provides those kinds of things. We're going to turn a lot of attention next time to the book In Tune with the World, A Theory of Festivity by Joseph Pieper. And but I just want to point out this one phrase from this. He says, at the bottom, everything that is is good, and it is good to exist. Man cannot have the experience of receiving what is loved unless the world and existence as a whole represent something good and therefore beloved to him. So it echoes back to the fact that God made everything, and God made everything good, and very good, he said at the end of his time. And Pieper goes back to this in a little bit. He says, in spite of everything, God finds the things, we find the things that are very good. Therefore, in spite of everything, we remain capable of joy, and even as far as it concerns us, of festivity. It's really in the joy, in recognizing the goodness of all creation that God has, and his provision of it to us for our daily bread, our daily nourishment, and enjoying that with one another, ultimately turning that back to praise to him for his goodness to us in providing it. That's where we really get to enjoy God and his good gifts to us. So we were made to glorify God and to enjoy him forever, as the Westminster says. Part of that is our enjoyment of food together. And when we enjoy it together, we commend it to one another. We praise, we just well up with praise because we're enjoying this goodness that is in creation, that God has made, and we direct that praise back to him together. And to do that in community is really so important, I think. It's for part of our worship of God to recognize he is good, he created things good, and he provides and cares for us with those things. And it's all to the praise of his glory. So next week, we will talk and turn our attention to festivity. And I'd like to close with just some words from J.R.R. Tolkien in The Lord of the Rings. He says that if more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. That is indeed true. And I hope that as you enjoy hospitality, welcoming people into your home to enjoy food together and glorify God through that enjoyment of it, that you'll remember these things, that we were meant to praise and enjoy, and through food we can do that together quite well. And we'll talk more specifically now, like I said, about the holidays and why there's a need for these special set-aside times that really are more lavish and go all out in some ways than our common everyday meals, and why that's important. So look forward to talking to you next time about that, and thank you very much. Have a good week. Thank you.